that is what is now being described essentially as toxic masculinity, right? This sense that the male societal wide has gone a bit wrong, has gone a bit left, right? And I think that whilst true, kind of needs a bit of a closer look at, because there's a lot of reasons as to why masculinity is undergoing so much pressure, so many changes, so many cultural shifts. And I think that without having like an eye on all of those other factors, it's very easy just to go look at all these toxic men and look at all of these traits. Now, the UK government has spoken up about this, somewhat off the back of the Adolescence TV series that's on Netflix at the moment. But they spoke up on this, and they've mentioned really that, you know, the issue is happening predominantly with younger men, you know, the younger generation. Now, obviously, we have changes in society like social media, the impact of the average influencer, for example, the algorithm, if you want. Now, I believe the algorithm is an extension of what you are looking for, what you're searching for, what you're into, essentially. But regardless of that, you be into it once, and that algorithm will keep churning it up and up and up. And so there's so many things which are now impacting the male psyche, which weren't necessarily able to do that 20, 30 years ago. And so we find ourselves now in a place where we do have toxic masculinity, but also we have toxic masculinity in a world that is so gender confused and gender fluid that it becomes harder and harder to pinpoint what a man is and what a man is supposed to be. If you take a look, again, 20, 30 years ago, it was probably a bit easier to determine, you know, the roles, typical gender roles, if you like, particularly that of a male and female. Now, I'm not saying all of those things were good. There were a lot of issues society had. And again, we're now in a society that's trying to change some of those things. For example, women in the workplace, and trying to reduce the discrepancy between pay, obviously, and rightfully so. But in a time like that, it was also slightly easier to look at a man and say, that's what you are, that's what your role is, and look at a woman and say, that's what you are and that's what your role is. Now, when I say role, I don't want anyone to be offended like I'm assigning you to lesser or more than. No, I'm just saying, obviously, as men and women, as male and female, we have different roles, and together we work very well if we're doing those different roles. I think some of the issue, of course, in terms of toxic masculinity is when we find ourselves confused in terms of our role. Now, as a woman, you can step back and say, well, it's not up to me to make you know what your role is, and I'm not confusing you. But I will say that with feminism, and it's not to say that I'm not a feminist to some extent, but if we look at the extreme form of it, with feminism, we end up in a place where men aren't really sure how much of a lead to take. Men aren't really sure how dominant to be, if that at all. You know, there's some people probably listening to me say these words right now and are going, oh, you're misogynistic. Why should you be dominant? Why should you lead? And again, that is the problem. And I'm not saying, when I speak about leadership, and this is my version of masculinity, when I speak about leadership, for example, I'm talking about a leader that is listening to those he is leading. They are leading, you know, not in a, you're going to do it my way or the highway. Absolutely not. I think to lead as a man in this example is to actually lead your family, your partner, your wife, your children in a way that is supportive of them and helps them get to their destination and where they're trying to be. So again, if I take that aspect, even that is being challenged in today's society about, well, who should be leading? Why are you leading? Why do men lead? Now, I don't want to go into the deep questions about why are men leading and so on and so forth, but when you consider that as a generation, certainly my generation, we were brought up with men in that role and women in a slightly different role. And I'm not talking about workplace, and I'm not talking about ambition and goals and dreams and the things you're good at and want to do. I'm just talking about how we relate to each other, right? The family, the relationship, the thing that's brought all of us here. Yeah, I'm here because of a man and a woman got together and had a child. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm talking about that and how that comes together and how that exists and survives. It has been a challenge to be male in the last 10 years. Now, if I take something else, for example, that I think has heavily impacted this, if you look at, for example, and now I don't want it to be a case of who's earning more in the workplace, but just if we identify that men were historically earning more 20 years now, some will say, but if we talk about 20 years ago, for example, then you understand that whoever is earning more automatically by nature becomes what society describes as the breadwinner or the provider, right? So given that the workplace 20 years ago supported more men, paid men more, it was obvious that men were going to go to the workplace more often. The men were going to bring back most of the income and therefore be the providers. Now, whilst women are equally able to go and get that these days, it's not that has become the issue. You know, having a woman in the workplace is standard, normal, and should be absolutely endorsed, you know, as just, come on, this is where we're at. But whoever is in the workplace, man or woman, the breadwinner aspect, the aspect to be a provider, has now changed dramatically because of things like the prices of housing. So if you take those years ago when whoever was winning that money was able to go and, 3-4 times their salary afford the property that they were looking at, those margins have gone out of the window entirely. So as a man in the workplace who, my dad's, for example, generation was able to take his salary, and we're not talking lots and lots of money, we're talking like the average salary. Yeah, we're not talking about the top 10%. We're talking about the average income, was able to take that and quite casually buy a home, right? For me and my sisters and, our family to grow up in. Now, of course, my mum's income was a huge part of that as well, but that was just kind of standard. They didn't have to wait 10 years after they got married. They didn't have to have a huge, monetary plan, financial plan to make that happen. They just had to be two regular people in society holding two regular jobs, and guess what? They can go move into suburbia. Right now, two of your jobs, at best, you're buying a Help to Buy flat. Yeah, and I'm talking about average. I'm not talking about those doing slightly better, etc. Because you're all right, but for the average person, for the average man now, that becomes a challenge because we grew up. And I'm not talking about me necessarily, but as a man, we grew up with the expectation of you're going to be a provider. You're going to be someone who generates income, or hunter-gatherer back in the day, probably a bit easier, learn how to shoot an arrow and go do your thing, bring back a boar or whatever. But now, school tells you you're going to, and all of us, rightfully so, we're going to go out, earn our income, go do what our parents did, go live in a home, buy a car, all of these things. And that has totally shifted. And when you think about how that impacts the male psyche now, I can go out and buy a chain, I can go out and buy some fresh trainers, I might even be able to go out and finance a car, right? Most people don't own their car. Most men don't own their cars. They're financing them. So they don't have the money to have the vehicle. They have the money on a monthly basis to pay for the vehicle. Obviously, this is the society we live in. The introduction of credit changed the game entirely for most people. But you see how that impacts the psyche quite a lot, because if the expectation of the male, I think this is what we're identifying. We're identifying the expectation of what society tells you are as a young boy, versus the reality of what you actually are able to become and able to achieve, is they're far and wide. And I think when you hit the reality versus the expectation over and over and over and over again, it can become crushing. And so what you do, and I think this applies to all of us, is that when we don't necessarily hit where we wanted to go, do what we wanted to do, achieve what we were aiming for, we then subscribe to something lesser, because it's now more comfortable for us to operate within that realm. So rather than me consistently get my hopes up and feel disappointed that I'm not achieving at this level, that I'm not able to do this, what I need to do is I need to find someone else, something else that identifies with where I'm at, that I can dig in on and go, yeah, absolutely. This shouldn't be my problem. So where this goes wrong for men is when characters like Andrew Tate pop up. Because you've created a void, society has created a void that it's not filling. Someone like Tate comes in and identifies something on top of the monetary aspect, the manly aspect of, society used to employ men to build build industry. We used to build industry, and now we're not here. But when you add to that the aspect of how men and women now interact, and then you start to you now prescribe blame to the woman for your lack of ability to make money, your lack of ability to engage with them or sustain a healthy relationship with a woman. Now, this influence comes in and tells you that that's the problem, and that's the problem, and they're the problem. And so what you do is you internalize that, and then it now starts to become something that you actually have your backup about in terms of societal wide. So you're now going out and you're saying bad things to people, you're doing bad things to people, and you're justifying them because bad things have happened to you. And I think that's what really summarizes toxic masculinity, is a whole load of men who have had a whole load of damage done to them by society, by social media. I can't say that it's external problem. This is the world we've got to deal with. I've got to deal with this. We've got to all just, right, I've been kicked, but am I getting back up? Or am I going to form a society on the floor around other people that have been kicked? That's the option. And I think what we're not providing enough as a society is options to get up, a different outlook on masculinity. Because we do need to address the fact that if you are a young man and you're a single young man and you've got yourself a job and you're working hard and yet you can't afford a property, you still live at home with mum and dad, you don't have a girlfriend, we've got to address something there, right? We can't just act like, deal with it, because dealing with it is leading to more and more toxic masculinity. And so we need an approach which is actually more like, I see the issue you've got. I think acknowledgement is one of the starting points here, is to stop saying, just get on with it. You're a man, whatever. This is the problem. And also, this is one of the problems that has caused this toxic mindset, which is to approach a man as if you shouldn't be emotional, as if you shouldn't be hurt, upset, disappointed, weary, tired. It suggests to men that to have any of those things, depressed, to have any of those things sitting on you is a weakness. Society has done that. Society has told us the strongest men don't cry and all have six packs and testosterone levels through the roof. And now if you don't present like that, all of a sudden now you're like, well, where do I fit in? And if you add to that the fact that you might be struggling to speak with women, the opposite sex, you might be struggling to engage in meaningful relationships. Maybe you didn't have sisters, maybe you're not particularly close with your mum, maybe you haven't had many girlfriends or relationships with women across it. That in itself is going to lead to more toxicity, because you're now feeling a way about it, you're hurt about it, and when you're hurt, hurt people, and that's what's happening. And so it's not just a solve like, right, go and talk to more people, go and earn more money, because it's just not that simple, right? We've got to allow men to fail. If I'm honest with you, you've got to allow men to fail, and men have to allow men to fail, and women have to allow men to fail. Right? I think what doesn't help particularly, and I sidestep a little bit, but when we look at the dating world, what doesn't help are women that are like, yeah, you better provide for me. I want 8 holidays a year. I don't believe in 50-50. Now, my own preference on that is kind of individual, right? I think the individual is really important, and their motivation, their ambition, their heart is really important as well. And their mindset, how they've been raised, their family experience, what their dad did for them versus what they expect their husband to do for them, how their mum was looked after by their dad or wasn't looked after by their dad, etc., result in why they want what they want. The problem is that when you now as a society put unreasonable expectations on a generation of men that were not raised in the same society as your parents, as your father, as your role models, as the love that you want. And so when now we have a younger generation of men faced with the fact that society isn't letting them get ahead, can't get a better job, can't afford a home. Now, rather than finding a woman that's like, yeah, let's build this together, let's do this together, you're meeting women that are like, well, you ain't got enough to look after me. Do you see how that is going, like, a lot? Look, let's call it what it is. That's like 90%, if not more for most people, the whole reason of life. Yeah, what we do with our day, our toil, our work, that's a large part of your day, right? Go beyond that, our relationships, massively important. We all know to be isolated, to be taken out of society is horrible. Like depression and loneliness, chronic loneliness are one of the number one things impacting Britons today. Loneliness. So we're talking about some of the most fundamental things that apply to you being happy as a human being. In today's society, in today's current world, ecosystem, government, body, whatever, a lot of these things are being denied to you. Meanwhile, you're able to scroll through everyone else's success and attractive women left, right, and center, and rich, well-off, successful, influential people. At some point in time, it's going to impact you negatively. And now, if at that point in time you find something that soothes that, something that speaks directly into that, but isn't speaking into it in a positive way, in an understanding way, in a way that's suggesting, actually, look around, this is happening to more than just you, but is actually making you feel like you're not alone, we're in this war together, you're going to start to get your back up, and you're going to start to look for the war that you're not in. But it's a whole psyche, it's a whole psychology, and so one of the things, and I'll try to summarize with this because it's a huge topic, but one of the things I think is really helpful as a man is to just try to be mindful about your individuality, right? Your individuality is your masculinity. I mean, admittedly, we can all look in Men's Health magazine and go, right, that's what a good man looks like. We can all look at Jeff Bezos or, Elon Musk, not a great example, but, in terms of wealth, and go, that's masculinity. We can all take our my dad, great example, masculinity. But your individuality is what makes you the man you are. And I think it's really important to embrace that. And it's a bit of a tangent, but I want to kind of address this a little bit. Particularly with those that are born male, but would argue that they are female on the inside. They are a woman. I feel that some of, and not all of those people, by the way, but just some, I think society has also caused those people a problem, because society has said your masculinity shouldn't wear a dress. And so therefore, if you feel like wearing a dress today, you're not a man. That's actually a woman inside you. And the point I want to make, because this is like murky waters, you don't want to jump too deep in here, but the point I want to make is what if society said your individuality was your masculinity, and therefore the strongest of men today could go ahead and wear a dress. There are plenty of cultures where men do wear dresses, so that's not the best example across the world, but in a British society you understand obviously what the implications of that are. And I would just say that is a symptom of a society that doesn't have an understanding or a good grip on what masculinity is. Now, just like being a person, masculinity evolves. The kind of man boy I was at 18, at 25, has evolved, has become more mature, has grown wiser. Now, it's not to say I haven't had my fair share of issues that have come up that have challenged that for me, That can happen in a blink of an eye. You just think that the person you're attracted to isn't attracted to you, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, what is it about me? Am I not manly enough? Don't I have enough facial hair? Don't I have enough muscles? Don't I have enough money? Don't I have enough attitude or a deeper voice than, whatever you want to describe as being male, you would internalize as me not having enough of it. And I would say one of the healing points, one of the best things you can do is to just accept the fact that your version of masculinity is masculinity. As a man, whatever it is that you are man. You are a male. You are masculine, right? And I would say don't let society tell you too much about that narrative, because society doesn't know. And actually, for the most part, society is just trying to sell you a product at the end of it. Take Men's Health, which tells you this is how you look as a good man, a healthy man. That whole thing is not only selling itself, right? The owners of that are making money, but the products in it are just selling themselves. This is how you be healthy. Says who? Says the product, says the creatine developer, says the protein milkshake developer. Do you see what I mean? So it's not to say that we can't listen to or be a part of society, because that is also what it means to be a man, how you fit in, how you help, how you support, how you lead society, right? Those things are important as well. But in terms of your internal masculinity dial, clock, register, whatever, I think it's solely based on you, man, and your experiences and how you present your masculinity to the world. I would say that listening to certain people go on and on about the issues that society has is not going to be helpful. And just telling yourself that it's not you, it's everyone else's problem is not going to align you with a happier life and a happier version of yourself. But I would say that, if you are able to, you should really just take the time to be okay with who you are. And I mean that. It takes time to be okay with who you are, your version of masculinity. You might have daughters, you might have a son, you might just be a son. And you are going to have to teach someone else how to do this one day as well. And they're going to have to go figure it out for themselves as well. And I think, and this is my closing point, part of that as well as a man is also to be able to instruct and to help other young men figure out what their masculinity looks like. The truth is that masculinity is a really powerful agent for change in society. And society needs masculinity. Your town, your home, your village, your area, your city, your country. It needs you to be a man. But it needs you to be a unique one. And it needs you to be a man with your own version of what it means to be masculine. So you empower someone else who has their own version of what it means to be masculine. And I think that is the most powerful thing we can do, is to empower each other to be whatever version of male it is that you are. And I don't, that might be a bit far and wide for some people. I don't think that there are versions of male, but you understand what I mean. The version of you, the masculine man that you will present to the world, I think that it's really important that you